I mean, what in the day-to-day life, what kind of features characterize someone with COVID anxiety syndrome? What sort of things are they doing that may impair their ability to sort of function in life?
Yeah, well, we know that the most recent data indicates that being vaccinated doesn't appear to make a difference as to whether the syndrome is present or not, i.e., there are individuals who are vaccinated who are continuing to avoid and worry and check and clean, etc. So those kinds of behaviors are clear. We're walking down the road knowing full well that transmission is very, very unlikely, even if we're not wearing masks, and people sort of jump out of the way. Sometimes you wonder, why are they doing it? They look very young and healthy. The chances of anything happening to them is very small. You have reports of individuals continuously following news in some at the cost, at the detriment of their work. For example, that's
today
one of the.
We've recorded for the first time 0 COVID deaths. We have numbers that are tiny. Is it surely not something that will dissipate as the news, with time and as people?
So exactly. Hopefully, for the vast majority of individuals, this will dissipate. But because it's been going on for a long time, 12, 14, 15 months of lockdown times mixed messaging, we are concerned that it might be a number of people, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%, who just become stuck. And what happens is that even if you tell them that the virus is gone, even if you tell them, that the virus is endemic, or you tell them that the variants, there are thousands of them and they're meaningless, they will have acquired and practiced these behaviors to such a point where abandoning them causes terrible anxiety. So being together in a theater and suddenly somebody coughing in October or November next to you, even if rationally you know that that's unlikely to affect you, you've been vaccinated, the virus is endemic, the idea of not leaving the theater or of not washing one's hands is so terrifying that life becomes limited. And on top of that, our biggest concern is that the attention to threat, the avoidance, the worry, the checking, this syndrome features will then escalate into another psychological problem, such as health anxiety, OCD, and that it will be modeled to young people. So maybe very young children of individuals who are suffering in inverted commas from the syndrome will model the unhelpful behavior
of the parent.
Yes.
So at the moment, what do you think the scale of the problem is? And have you any idea what we might be left with as a residue, as the months go on and some people start to feel more confident? What is the scale now, do you think?
So the scale of the problem is very big, significant, according to our latest data. So our latest data from March and April paints a picture that approximately 1 in 10, between 1 in 5 and 1 in 10 individuals are stuck in this syndrome, i.e., these behaviors are very expensive emotionally for them.
Yeah.
We have looked at data across other countries where the lockdowns have been eased beforehand, data that I will share with you in 3 weeks' time. And in countries where the lockdowns had been eased well before the UK, around about 10 to 15% of people were still displaying the syndrome. So these are countries that have not been locked up, but had the virus they've not been locked up or in lockdown,
So does that not suggest that it's less about messaging and more about the virus? I mean, other countries, did they use the same tactics that we did? Is that not? Oh, and I suppose social media is another driver, perhaps.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know what other countries have done. I know that in some European countries, the messaging about the dangers of the virus are relentless.
Right.
From anecdotal evidence.
Yeah.
They are continuous. Social media may have been a route to, especially probably at the beginning of the pandemic, that may have fueled anxiety.
Yeah.
Maybe in that demographic of young people who may use it more.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to be left with a significant number of individuals who are going to be stuck. And my concern is October, November, December, when we might have variants. Why wouldn't we have them? It's a natural progression. Or what happens if we have other respiratory viruses that mimic? Well, they're all very similar.
Well, they may
mimic
up, and they may
COVID. What's going to happen to those who will have avoided for a year and a half?
So, what should people do if they have? They start to recognize that they may be one of those people. How do they overcome it?
In the same way that one would overcome any other anxiety problem. So behaviorally and cognitively. Behaviorally would mean returning to what we do what we used to do in a graded way. So going out, mixing with people, maybe outside to begin with.
Should people be anxious now at all? Should people be anxious now at all? Would you go into a football stadium of people? Would you be quite unanxious?
From a personal point of view, yes, I would be. Especially stadiums, they're open. I would have no anxiety personally.
I mean, I know it's not your field, but what should people be anxious about? People are anxious. I know they are, and they're still moving to the side of the path. That's not appropriate. But is there something, is there a level of anxiety that should be acceptable at this point?
I would turn around the question and say, how much more avoidance, worry, and checking do people need to do in order to stay safe? So the anxiety will be with us for a long time. Do I feel uncomfortable in certain situations? Yes, I do, because I'm not used to being that close to people as I used to once be, and as we were all once much closer to each other physically and socially. What do I do with that anxiety is the question. So if I start to avoid, if I start to overcheck, I will never come out of it, because there will be another wave of viruses. So that will come our way, as they always come in autumn and winter. So for me, the point here is not to rationalize the anxiety or the fear. The point is to let go of the control and find out. I've been vaccinated. I am 35 years old. Chances are very, very small of anything happening to me. How will I find that out? How will I return to normal? By not avoiding anymore, by not checking anymore, by not washing the hands anymore, except in a sort of reasonable way, like my grandmother used to say, before dinner time, 3-4 times a day, not 30 times a day.
Yeah.
So that's the answer, is really not in rationalizing the anxiety, but in giving up the control.
Do you think Italy fueled the sort of anxiety last year when there were images coming through? Do you think that was fueled by the media? Yes.
If you want to scare people, fear is acquired in many different ways and manners. Modeling is one. When, as in not catwalk modeling, obviously, but modeling other people's behaviors and responses. And another way of acquiring fear is through information. So the images of individuals dying, the ambulances, will inevitably have increased the collective fear levels significantly. And on top of that, if we start telling people, be particularly careful, scan the environment for the virus. Yeah, that was another message.
It was alert, wasn't it? Be alert.
Stay alert.
Yeah,
And the problem is, how do you stay alert? You know, is he coughing? Is she sneezing? Do they look pale and ill? You know, how do you know that somebody is ill or not? How do you stay alert? And you can see that this messaging has fueled directly the syndrome, because one of the 4 facets of the syndrome is sort of attention to threat, monitoring other people's symptoms, which for a period over the last year we were asked to do. Stay alert.
Does that have a neurological? Has anyone looked at the brain? Does that increase wiring in a certain direction or light up certain parts of the brain? So what happens biologically?
Yeah, if you want to incubate anxiety in people, what you do is you get them to worry, to avoid, and to check. So we know that worrying, if done regularly and in a repeated fashion, will bring to an increase in fear and anxiety. In fact, it's the royal road to anxiety, and we tend to acquire patterns of worrying when we're very young, between the ages of 5 and 12. And by the time we're teenagers, they're automatic behaviors,
Really?
sort of software. So I think over the last year, we've been inundated with messages to do with worrying, and may have acquired the behavior.
But I'd really love to pick up on that point about children. Not only have they been inundated with these messages or watching or aping parental behavior, but also they've been locked away in bedrooms, haven't they, for a year and kept apart from their peer groups and other people. What legacy might that have in that generation? It's fairly experimental. We perhaps...
Yes, the legacy is multifaceted. So we know that there will be a legacy to do with learning. They won't have been able to learn in the social manner that you and I did.
What sort of things do you think?
From what I was actually talking to a few teachers recently out of curiosity, and they've noticed, and I'm sure that we can find evidence to support this, they've noticed, difficulties in language development, because so much language acquisition is through social interaction at school.
What sort of ages are you talking?
Between the ages of 3 and 6. One teacher was telling me, for example.
Yeah, I've heard this. Yeah.
Then there is the modeling of anxious behaviors, such as washing hands. And you can see now that their children that go around, touch something, they immediately take the sanitizer out. Then there is patterns of worrying and overthinking, because children will have sort of, like sponges, absorb that feeling in the environment of threat. Then there is the avoidance. So I think it's been bad enough for people in their sort of adult years or teenage years. We don't know how bad it's going to be for younger people.